Welcome back to Aslan Elf. Today we're diving deep into one of the most controversial topics in modern politics. Could Donald Trump implement something like universal basic income, UBI, to save Americans from economic turmoil caused by his own tariffs? Or could he even use Dogecoin to distribute money to citizens? Stick around because we'll break down how these ideas could play out, what it means for the economy, and whether this could lead to inflation or even riots if people plunge into poverty. But before we begin, these videos do take time to make. So please hit the like and subscribe button, letting me know if you want more of this type of content, and feel free to leave a comment below. Let's start by setting the stage. To understand why we're even talking about universal basic income or Dogecoin dividends, we need to look at the elephant in the room, Donald Trump's tariffs. Love them or hate them, these tariffs are reshaping the US economy in ways that could have serious consequences for everyday Americans. So what exactly are tariffs? At their core, tariffs are taxes on imported goods designed to make foreign products more expensive and encourage consumers to buy American-made alternatives. Sounds good on paper, right? But here's the catch. Tariffs don't just hurt foreign companies. They also raise prices for US consumers. Experts predict that if these tariffs stay in place, we're looking at slower economic growth, higher inflation, and a major hit to consumer confidence. And it's not just speculation. New modeling shows that Trump's so-called Liberation Day tariffs could shrink U.S. GDP by $149 billion, or about 0.49% of the economy, because they increase production costs and consumer prices. That's money that could have been spent elsewhere, like on groceries, rent, or savings. Now let's talk numbers. According to recent studies, the average American household could lose up to $3,800 annually due to rising prices caused by these tariffs. Some estimates go even higher, suggesting that households might face losses of around $5,200 per year. Imagine what that kind of financial strain would do to families already living paycheck to paycheck. And it doesn't stop there. Higher tariffs don't just hurt consumers, they also damage long-term economic health. Research analyzing data from 151 countries between 1963 and 2014 found that increased tariffs reduce output and productivity, increase unemployment, and worsen income inequality. So, while the intention behind these policies might be to protect American jobs, the reality is far more complicated and potentially devastating. As these tariffs take full effect, we're likely to see rising prices, shrinking disposable incomes, and instability in the job market. For many Americans, this isn't just an abstract economic issue, it's a personal crisis. And when people feel financially squeezed, history tells us they often push back. So the big question becomes, what happens next? If millions of Americans find themselves struggling to make ends meet, how will the government respond? Could we see unconventional solutions like direct payments to citizens, whether through traditional means or something as radical as cryptocurrency payouts? We'll explore those possibilities in the next segments. But first, let's pause and reflect on just how much these tariffs are already shaping the economic landscape and why they might force policymakers to think outside the box. Now that we've laid out the economic fallout from Trump's tariffs, let's talk about what happens next if things continue to spiral. History has shown us time and again that when people lose their financial footing, frustration can boil over into social unrest. And trust me, this isn't just speculation. It's a pattern we've seen play out in countries around the world. Think about it. When families are struggling to afford basic necessities like food, housing, or healthcare, they don't stay quiet for long. Economic discontent breeds anger, and anger often leads to action, or in some cases, chaos. For example, during periods of rising costs and stagnant wages, protests, strikes, and even riots have become common responses to systemic failures. We've seen this dynamic unfold right here in America too. Take the 1967 and 1968 riots, which were fueled by a combination of poverty, unemployment, and racial tension. Or look at the 1992 Los Angeles riots, sparked by economic inequality and police brutality. These events remind us that civil unrest isn't just about one issue. It's often a perfect storm of overlapping grievances. Fast forward to today. If millions of Americans find themselves plunged deeper into poverty because of tariffs raising prices on everything from electronics to groceries, could we see similar scenes? It's not hard to imagine. Rising costs and shrinking disposable incomes create fertile ground for frustration and eventually pushback. Here's where political pressure comes into play. Leaders like Donald Trump aren't immune to public sentiment. In fact, history shows that politicians will often take drastic measures to avoid being swept away by waves of discontent. Even someone who's traditionally skeptical of government assistance might feel compelled to act if faced with widespread unrest. So, what could that action look like? Well, one possibility is implementing some form of direct financial relief, whether it's framed as stimulus checks, a universal basic income, or something else entirely. This wouldn't necessarily mean embracing traditional welfare policies. Instead, Trump might rebrand these payments as economic dividends or tie them to his pro-crypto agenda, like distributing funds through Dogecoin or Bitcoin savings accounts. The key takeaway here is simple. No leader wants to preside over a nation in turmoil. If the economic pain caused by tariffs becomes unbearable for large swaths of the population, Trump, or any future administration, would face immense pressure to do something. Whether that something is effective, sustainable, or even ethical is another question entirely. But before we dive into potential solutions, let's pause for a moment and ask ourselves, is this really where we're headed? Could America be on the brink of a new era of social upheaval driven by economic hardship? The answers to those questions depend largely on how policymakers respond and whether they can address the root causes of this crisis before it's too late. All right, let's dive into one of the most talked about solutions to economic hardship, universal basic income, or UBI. If you're unfamiliar with the term, UBI is a government program that provides regular cash payments to everyone, rich or poor, employed or unemployed, without any conditions or requirements. It's been hailed by some as a revolutionary way to address poverty, inequality, and even job displacement caused by automation. But like any policy, it has its pros and cons. Let's break them down. First, let's talk about the benefits, or the pros, of UBI. One of the biggest advantages is that UBI reduces poverty and income inequality. By giving people a guaranteed minimum income, it ensures that no one falls below a certain financial threshold. This can lead to significant improvements in physical and mental health, food security, housing stability, and even educational outcomes. Imagine what a difference it would make for families struggling to pay rent or put food on the table. Another pro is that UBI simplifies welfare programs. Instead of navigating complex bureaucracies to qualify for assistance, individuals receive direct payments with no strings attached. This not only cuts administrative costs, but also eliminates the stigma often associated with traditional welfare programs. And here's an interesting point. UBI could actually encourage entrepreneurship and innovation. With a safety net in place, people might feel more comfortable taking risks, like starting a business or pursuing further education, that they otherwise couldn't afford to take. In fact, studies suggest that UBI increases consumption and demand, which can stimulate local economies and create jobs. Now, let's flip the coin and look at the cons. First, any gains from a UBI are short-term at best. Once implemented, there is immediate uptick in people's income levels. But over time, that gain dissipates as the market adjusts to this change, and soon people find themselves right where they were before they received a UBI. One major concern is cost. Funding UBI on a national scale would require massive amounts of money, potentially trillions of dollars per year. Where does that money come from? Some propose higher taxes, reallocating existing welfare budgets, or even printing more money. But each option comes with its own challenges. Speaking of printing money, there's another risk: inflation. If the government funds UBI by creating new currency without corresponding economic growth, it could decrease the value of the dollar and drive up prices, a phenomenon economists call too much money chasing too few goods. That means the very people UBI is meant to help could end up worse off if their purchasing power declines. There's also the question of work incentives. Critics argue that giving people free money might discourage them from seeking employment, especially low-wage jobs or jobs in manufacturing. Then there's the issue that many of the government programs we currently have are full of waste and fraud and have not solved the problem they were designed to. Look at those suffering from generational poverty. Many are on assistance programs to survive, yet remain impoverished. Why is that? Finally, there's the ideological debate. For some, UBI represents a shift toward bigger government and dependency on state support. Others see it as empowering individuals by giving them choice and autonomy over how they use their funds. These philosophical differences make UBI a polarizing topic in political circles. So where does all this leave us? Well, UBI isn't a magic bullet. It's a tool with both potential short-term benefits and significant long-term risks. In the context of our earlier discussion, UBI could be a lifeline for Americans grappling with the economic fallout of tariffs, but could create a state of dependency, which does more harm than good. Would Trump embrace such a policy? Unlikely. But he may not have a choice if the tariff wars drag on and Americans start rioting because they can no longer afford basic necessities. He might rebrand it as a stimulus dividend or tie it to his pro-crypto agenda, like distributing funds through Dogecoin or Bitcoin savings accounts. As we move forward, keep in mind that UBI isn't just an economic policy. It's a vision for society. It raises fundamental questions about fairness, freedom, and the role of government in ensuring everyone has a basic standard of living. And whether you love it or hate it, it's clear that UBI will remain a hot topic. All right, let's shift gears and talk about something a little more unconventional. The idea of distributing money to citizens through Dogecoin dividends. Yes, you heard that right. What if instead of traditional cash payments or stimulus checks, Americans received their financial relief in the form of cryptocurrency? This concept has gained traction recently, thanks in part to Elon Musk's suggestion of using Dogecoin, Doge, to distribute $5,000 checks to all Americans. And when you combine Musk's influence with Trump's pro-crypto stance, this idea starts to feel less like science fiction and more like a plausible policy experiment. So, how would this actually work? Let's break it down step by step. First, recipients would need to set up a digital wallet capable of storing and managing Dogecoin. Dogecoin is a decentralized, open-source, peer-to-peer digital currency that allows users to send and receive money with low transaction fees. For many people unfamiliar with cryptocurrencies, this could be a hurdle, but platforms like Coinbase or even simpler mobile apps have made the process relatively user-friendly. Once they're set up, individuals could then choose to spend, hold, or trade their Doge as they see fit. Now, why Dogecoin specifically? Well, for starters, Dogecoin was originally created as a lighthearted joke, a playful alternative to Bitcoin, but it has since grown into a legitimate cryptocurrency with a loyal following. Unlike Bitcoin, which has a fixed supply cap of 21 million coins, Dogecoin operates on an inflationary model, meaning new coins are continuously mined and added to circulation. While some critics argue this makes Doge less valuable in the long term, its abundance and affordability make it an attractive option for large-scale distributions like dividends. But here's where things get interesting. Could a Dogecoin dividend system qualify as a central bank digital currency or CBDC? The short answer is no. A CBDC is a digital form of a country's fiat currency, issued and regulated by the central bank. Dogecoin, on the other hand, operates on a decentralized blockchain network and isn't tied to any government or central authority. However, there are some similarities between the two ideas. Both involve direct transfers to citizens, bypassing traditional banking systems. So while it wouldn't technically be a CBDC, it could serve a similar function in terms of delivering financial support directly to the people. Of course, implementing such a system wouldn't come without challenges. One major concern is anti-money laundering AML regulations. Cryptocurrencies like Dogecoin operate on decentralized networks, making it difficult to monitor illicit activities like fraud or money laundering. Governments would need to figure out how to regulate these transactions without stifling innovation or violating privacy rights. Another challenge is public adoption. Not everyone is comfortable using cryptocurrencies, especially older generations or those without access to smartphones or computers. Would the government provide training programs or resources to help people navigate this new system? Or would they risk leaving behind millions of citizens who simply can't or won't participate? These are important questions that policymakers would need to address. And then there's the issue of volatility. Like any cryptocurrency, Dogecoin's value can fluctuate wildly based on market demand, investor sentiment, and broader economic trends. If someone receives $5,000 worth of Doge today, will it still be worth $5,000 tomorrow? For many people living paycheck to paycheck, that kind of uncertainty could be a deal breaker. Despite these challenges, the idea of a Dogecoin dividend has undeniable appeal. For one, it aligns perfectly with Trump's pro-crypto agenda, including his establishment of the strategic Bitcoin reserve and efforts to position America as the crypto capital of the planet. It also taps into the growing popularity of decentralized finance, DeFi, offering citizens a taste of what the future of money might look like. Moreover, distributing funds through Dogecoin could reduce reliance on traditional banking systems, which often charge high fees and take days to process international transfers. With Dogecoin, payments can be sent instantly and at a fraction of the cost. This speed and efficiency could be a game changer for people who need immediate financial relief. In summary, while the idea of Dogecoin dividends may seem far-fetched, it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility, especially given the current political climate and rapid advancements in blockchain technology. Whether it's framed as a universal basic income, a stimulus package, or simply a way to redistribute wealth, crypto-based solutions like this represent a bold step toward reimagining how governments interact with their citizens in the digital age. As we move into the next segment, keep this thought in mind. If implemented carefully, could a Dogecoin dividend pave the way for a fairer, more inclusive financial system, or would it create more problems than it solves? Now let's dive into one of the most controversial aspects of funding any large-scale financial relief program, whether it's universal basic income, Dogecoin dividends, or something else entirely. The question on everyone's mind is, what happens if the government simply prints more money to pay for it? While this might sound like an easy solution, it comes with some serious risks, chief among them being inflation and potentially even hyperinflation. To understand why printing money can lead to inflation, we need to break it down. When the government increases the money supply, essentially printing more dollars, it doesn't necessarily create more goods or services in the economy. Instead, you end up with more money chasing the same number of products. Economists call this phenomenon too much money chasing too few goods, and it almost always leads to higher prices. Let's put this into perspective. Imagine a small town where everyone suddenly has twice as much cash in their pockets. At first, people might feel richer and start spending more freely, but over time, businesses realize they can charge higher prices because there's so much money floating around. Before long, the cost of everything, from groceries to rent, goes up. This is inflation in action. And when it spirals out of control, it becomes hyperinflation, which can devastate economies, as seen in countries like Zimbabwe and Venezuela. Now let's connect this back to our discussion about UBI or Dogecoin dividends. If the US government were to fund such programs by printing money, it could trigger a similar chain reaction. For example, Kevin O'Leary, a well-known investor, has pointed out that excessive money printing directly contributes to rising prices. He famously noted, inflation, if we misuse the term to mean the rising prices themselves, is caused solely by printing more money. But inflation isn't just about higher prices, it also has broader consequences. One major issue is income redistribution. Inflation disproportionately affects lower-income families and older people who rely on fixed incomes, eroding their purchasing power faster than wealthier individuals whose assets may appreciate during inflationary periods. So while handing out money might seem like a quick fix for poverty, unchecked inflation could ultimately make life harder for the very people these policies are designed to help. Another long-term risk is how inflation shifts investment patterns. Instead of focusing on productive ventures that drive economic growth, investors often turn to speculative activities like real estate or commodities, further destabilizing the economy. Japan offers a cautionary tale here, a country that struggled with decades of stagnant growth partly due to mismanaged monetary policy. So, what's the alternative? Instead of printing money, governments could explore other funding mechanisms, such as reallocating existing budgets, imposing taxes on corporations benefiting from tariffs, or leveraging public-private partnerships. These approaches might not be as flashy as crypto payouts or direct cash injections, but they're far less likely to destabilize the economy. That said, there's no denying that printing money has its appeal, especially in times of crisis. It allows governments to act quickly without raising taxes or cutting essential services. However, history shows us that short-term solutions often come at a steep long-term cost. As McKinsey explains, inflation refers to a broad rise in the prices of goods and services across the economy, eroding purchasing power for both consumers and businesses. While printing money might seem like an attractive way to fund UBI or Dogecoin dividends, it carries significant risks, most notably inflation, which can spiral out of control and hurt the very people it's meant to help. Policymakers would need to tread carefully, balancing immediate relief with long-term economic stability. As we wrap up this segment, keep asking yourself, is there a way to provide financial support to struggling Americans without undermining the value of the dollar? Or will every solution inevitably involve trade-offs that ripple through the economy for years to come? We've covered a lot of ground so far: tariffs, social unrest, universal basic income, Dogecoin dividends, and the risks of printing money. But now it's time to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. What are the long-term implications of these policies? Because let's face it, whether it's UBI, crypto payouts, or any other form of financial relief, the decisions made today will shape the economy, society, and even global dynamics for decades to come. Let's start with the potential economic impacts. Research shows that widespread adoption of UBI could actually grow the economy over time. For example, studies suggest that UBI could generate billions in economic activity by boosting consumer spending and encouraging entrepreneurship. When people have more disposable income, they tend to spend it on goods, services, education, or starting businesses, and this increased demand can drive job creation and innovation. But here's the catch: it can completely backfire. And bear in mind, there is the great potential that it will be more detrimental than helpful. UBIs can end up costing the government more than the revenue it takes in, leading to massive money printing, which leads to further devaluation of the dollar, meaning inflation rises, thus decreasing your purchasing power. Basically, the implementation of a UBI can create a situation where, instead of giving Americans a monthly income that they can live off of and help ease their economic burden, it causes everything to increase in price, leaving Americans in the same boat of having more money, but still not being able to afford anything, not even basic necessities. We're all familiar with the image of a woman in post-World War I Germany using a wheelbarrow full of money to buy a single loaf of bread. If massive money printing is used to find a UBI, it will make it where you have piles of cash, but that cash is worthless. The other issue is that it could disincentivize people to work. After all, why work at a thankless job where you're easily replaced and paid crap when you have a guaranteed monthly income? The problem with this is that if people decide to stop working because they now have a UBI, productivity will go down, causing more supply chain woes, decreased products to buy, which will lead to higher costs, thus making it where you still can't afford to buy anything, or there won't be anything to buy. The other issue is, how do you determine how much each household receives? Does every member of a household get the same amount, which can cause social strife, as some will complain about how that is unfair to those who live alone, and the households with more people will claim they need more because there are more people to support? It also leaves the door open for those making less than $100,000 a year, for example, in annual income to claim that they should receive more than those making more money than them. Do we distribute one payment per household regardless of how many individuals live there, making it where, whether you have 5 or a single person living in the home, each household gets the same exact amount? Again, this will cause those who have multiple people living in a single home to cry foul, stating that they need more because they have more people living there. Are the amounts going to be based on household income, meaning some will get more money than others? This will cause social divide, as people will rightfully complain about someone else getting more money than them and feeling cheated because of it. After all, a person earning $250,000 a year doesn't necessarily have more disposable income than the person earning $50,000 a year when you consider how much debt the majority of Americans carry. If the person earning $250,000 has over $100,000 in student loan debt, he will feel cheated if he only receives $5,000 a month in UBI, while his counterpart earning $50,000 a year but maybe has zero debt gets $10,000 a month because, in an effort to equitably distribute the UBIs, the government decides to make monthly UBI payments dependent upon an individual's or household's annual income. All of these scenarios can create a situation where people are pitted against each other, as some will believe they weren't given enough and that others were given what they don't deserve, and others will believe that they are simply being used to support those unwilling to work. In short, the very problems a UBI hopes to solve could make them far worse and cause new ones. But what about technological unemployment, which is becoming an increasingly urgent issue as automation continues to replace human labor? Widespread adoption of UBI could help combat this challenge by providing a safety net for workers displaced by technology and give individuals the freedom to pursue retraining, education, or creative ventures. A UBI could turn technological disruption into an opportunity rather than a crisis. On the flip side, there's the question of dependency versus empowerment. Critics worry that programs like UBI might discourage work or foster reliance on government handouts, as mentioned earlier. Shifting gears slightly, what about the global repercussions? If the US were to implement something as unconventional as Dogecoin dividends, it could send shockwaves through international markets. Countries around the world would be forced to reconsider their own monetary policies, especially regarding digital currencies and decentralized finance. Imagine a scenario where nations begin experimenting with blockchain-based systems to deliver welfare payments or central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. This could accelerate the global shift toward a cashless society, raising questions about privacy, regulation, and cybersecurity. After all digital payments can be tacked when done through a centralized system. This means that the government issuing these digital UBIs knows what you are purchasing and when. What if the people in power decide they don't want you buying a certain product? They could have the system programmed to bar you from using your UBI to buy said product, or they could lower how much you receive or take it away entirely. This brings to light the concern many people have if we were to go to a digital UBI. How do you prevent the government from using it as a way to control what you can and cannot purchase? We also know that cybersecurity is not on the top of the government's to-do list. If we use a digital UBI, the risk of cyber theft and identity theft is great. You could wake up one morning and find nothing in your digital account and the government giving you an IOU without so much as an apology for their failure to protect your digital UBI from cyber theft. And then there's the geopolitical angle. A move toward crypto-based solutions could position the US as a leader in the digital economy, but it could also provoke resistance from countries wary of American dominance in emerging technologies. For example, China's push for its own digital yuan reflects a broader trend of nations seeking to assert control over their monetary systems in response to globalization and technological change. How the US navigates this landscape will have profound implications for trade, diplomacy, and global financial stability. Finally, let's reflect on the legacy of such policies. Whether it's Trump championing Dogecoin dividends or embracing a rebranded version of UBI, these initiatives would redefine his administration's place in history. Would he be remembered as a visionary who embraced cutting-edge solutions to address pressing challenges, or as someone whose bold experiments backfired, leaving behind unintended consequences? History tells us that transformative policies often come with trade-offs. The New Deal, for instance, failed to pull America out of the Great Depression and prolonged it instead, while also expanding the role of government and introducing a whole slew of new taxes that are still in effect today. It also set the precedent for deficit spending. The introduction of welfare was meant to help pull Americans out of poverty and end poverty, but the opposite happened. Instead, poverty in America has steadily increased, and no matter how much government assistance is given to the poorest of Americans, they always seem to remain impoverished. However, some who have received government grants to attend college were able to graduate with a degree that helped them get a high-paying job without burdensome student loan debt. So the question remains, do government handouts, which is what a UBI is, help people? The answer is not a clearly defined yes or no because it depends upon the individual and the situation and how the handout are given and funded. I would say that on an individual basis, it could be quite beneficial to that individual if they manage their money right and make smart decisions. But when done on a massive scale as a one-size-fits-all policy, such handouts prove to be disastrous in the long term. We've reached the end of our deep dive into one of the most pressing issues facing America today. How do we address the economic fallout from tariffs, and what role could solutions like universal basic income or Dogecoin dividends play in stabilizing the country? Let's take a moment to summarize the key points we've covered and reflect on where this conversation leaves us. First, we explored how Trump's tariffs, while intended to protect American industries, are causing significant economic pain for everyday citizens. Rising prices, shrinking disposable incomes, and slower GDP growth are just a few of the consequences. These hardships could push millions of Americans toward financial instability, potentially sparking social unrest if left unaddressed. From there, we discussed the possibility of implementing UBI, or something resembling it, as a way to provide relief. UBI has clear benefits, reducing poverty, simplifying welfare programs, and encouraging entrepreneurship. But it also comes with risks, including inflation if funded irresponsibly, resistance from those rightfully wary of expanding government assistance, or causing more economic division and societal unrest instead of easing it. Then there is the idea of Dogecoin dividends, a crypto-based twist that aligns with Trump's pro-crypto agenda and Elon Musk's vision for decentralized finance. While distributing funds through Dogecoin might sound futuristic, it raises important questions about accessibility, volatility, security, and regulation. Would it pave the way for a fairer financial system, or create new challenges we're not prepared for? We also examined the dangers of printing money to fund these initiatives. While it might seem like an easy solution, excessive money creation risks devaluing the dollar and fueling inflation, which disproportionately harms low-income families. This underscores the importance of finding sustainable funding mechanisms that balance immediate relief with long-term stability. Finally, we zoomed out to consider the broader implications, both domestically and globally. From reshaping the economy to redefining America's position in the world, policies like UBI or Dogecoin dividends have the potential to transform society in profound ways. But they also come with trade-offs that policymakers must carefully weigh. So, what does all this mean for the future? If history teaches us anything, it's that transformative policies often emerge during times of crisis. Whether it's the New Deal during the Great Depression or the rise of digital currencies in response to globalization, Moments of upheaval force us to rethink old paradigms and embrace new possibilities. But these new policies, though designed to solve a current upheaval, oftentimes create new problems and have unforeseen long-term consequences. The question now is, are we ready to take that leap? Could Donald Trump, or any leader, navigate the complexities of implementing UBI or crypto payouts without triggering unintended consequences? Or does the answer lie with us? Instead of looking to government, we need to look to ourselves. We are trained since infancy to go to school, get a degree, take on debt to get said degree, get a job, take on more debt, and spend our existence earning barely enough to stay afloat. It is time for us, as individuals, to change how we look at wealth. After all, you decide how you spend your money. You decide what debt you want to take on. You decide your future. A UBI could, in the short term, alleviate a lot of economic pain for Americans. But in the long term, it could be our undoing. My advice is, if you do get a UBI, don't go off and buy a bunch of stuff you don't need, which is what the government wants you to do. Use it to invest in yourself, whether it is to further your education, to give you more marketable skills in a changing job market, to pay down debt, or to invest in hard assets like real estate or gold. Either way, invest in yourself. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who might benefit from this discussion. And tune back for more. Until then, stay curious, keep questioning the status quo, and remember, you decide your financial future.